Joyce. And we'll repeat that again. So we have coming up two of our interns who are working on the coastal mapping and hydrokinetic characterization project. They were mentored by Erin Trosham. So yeah, I'll hand the mic on over to you all.
Okay, yeah, so we've been working on the coastal mapping project, and the main goal of this project is to get data collection and analysis of Alaska's coastline. Doing this, we've been using topobathymetric data as well as satellite imagery, and those are the two main things that we've been looking at.
Yeah, so this project consisted of a few different parts. The big one that we worked on most of the summer on was LiDAR topobathymetry characterization and coastal elevation. So just a quick overview of bathymetry is characterizing the depth of the coast. Then the other big thing was Landsat Linker, providing a 50-year history of Arctic erosion. Landsat Linker was linking up old satellite data with newer satellite data that uses a different storage format. And then going into our more individual projects, I worked more on determining landslide risks with remote sensing data, and Joy worked on using machine learning algorithms to optimize LiDAR editing.
So in the bigger picture, what we're looking at in coastal mapping is creating resources for exploring developing projects along Alaska's coastline, especially Landsat Linker, which is the 50-year time-based data set. Due to Alaska's changing climate, especially along the Arctic coast, there's been a lot of erosion in the last few decades, and it hasn't been mapped properly. So by mapping this, we are providing resources for developing projects with updated information.
All right, so just to go a little more in depth with LiDAR topobathymetry. So the end goal with these projects is to create a digital elevation of the end goal of the LiDAR topobathymetry is to create a digital elevation model of the areas that we scan. So we have a specific LiDAR sensor that's owned by NOAA. Yes, that goes around to different villages around the state or other places of interest. They'll collect data with a special LiDAR sensor that can penetrate into the water. And from this data, what we worked on is cleaning the data. LiDAR sensors are very sensitive and they pick up a lot of noise from debris and birds and all the things that hang out in the water. So we spent the summer cleaning this data and creating guides to do that because there's a lot of stuff to consider.
So the second part of the project we've been working on is Landsat Linker, which is a processing system ran through Google Earth Engine, taking satellite imagery from the from the Landsat satellites 1 through 8, which runs from 1971 to 2021. And as you see, this animation on the left is from Cryptovic, and a lot of the images are pretty clear, but there's a few in there that are pretty blurry and hard to see. So what Landsat Linker does is it goes through and filters out images that have too many clouds, too much ice, or are overall just unusable for what we're wanting.
All right. And then to talk a little about the project that I was working on. So with climate change, especially in a lot of places in Alaska, increased precipitation is one of the main effects. And an additional effect of that is increasing landslide risk. Water content of soils is one of the main drivers of landslides. And with that increasing, landslide risk is increasing. That really was shown with the 2020 Homer landslide that killed 2 people. So trying to understand this risk at a larger scale so that we can cover more communities is really important. This little animation is just of the big storm that came in around in December that caused the landslide. So for this, I used a very brand new classification algorithm that's developed called Google Dynamic World version 1. It's been worked on for a while, but it just came out, luckily. It what it does is it is a classification program that classifies different pixels in the Sentinel-2 satellite images. For every image that it takes, it classifies them into 8 different image classes, and from those classifications, we determined that a change in tree vegetation for Southeast Alaska, going from a place with tree vegetation to a place with no tree vegetation, would be a good way to model landslide occurrence. And from this, it works out pretty well. We can pretty clearly see the landslide in Haines, but there are some problems with it. It also picks up this model also picks up blowdown from storms of trees that fall down, especially along the coast. And it also gets confused about snow melting. So that's something we're gonna have to work on to optimize in the future. This project we're also hoping to use in the future to go and scan other areas with the LiDAR sensor. We're gonna communicate with JavelTech and say that these might be interesting locations to go to and see if we can see landslide debris in the water.
Okay. And so for my personal project, I've been working on training Google's machine learning product Vertex to identify problems that occur in the LiDAR data. So when LiDAR data is being collected, they're also taking RGB imageries at the same time. And the problems like debris and birds and boats are really obvious in these RGB images, but they're not obvious in the LiDAR data. So we're hoping to be able to look at data from flights taken in Homer in 2016 and 2019 and look at the RGB imagery to detect the obvious problems before it's turned into point cloud data, and hopefully implement that in past and future sites that have been flown by JavelTech, which is the LiDAR company. So right now, this project is still in process. I've been able to transfer the RGB data into Google Earth Engine in order to scale it down so that it can actually be properly run through Google Earth Engine, which is what it will go back into after it has been ran through the Google product Vertex. So one of the decisions to make for this was figuring out if we should use automatic versus manual machine learning. And we right now are going to be using Google's Vision, which is much more automated, to find the initial problem areas and detect initial birds and debris. And then we'll be going into Vertex to kind of manually go in and figure out exactly what we want to look at for all these sites, but that is all still in process, and we're going to be brainstorming a bit more on how to do that.
All right, so our research process over the summer has been sort of gone in steps. Earlier this summer, we mostly spent our time learning and researching the programs that we were running and learning how to sort of just edit, say, LiDAR data. And then we moved on to creating code in Google Earth Engine to run our programs. Practicing involved a lot of trial and error. The images, all these different image programs are characterized differently, and sometimes they didn't like to intermix. But that's just kind of the nature of data science with remote sensing imagery.
Okay, so for lessons learned, we've really been able to learn how to do some of the technicalities of data science, especially in Google Earth Engine and LiDAR classification and cleaning processing. But some of the other lessons have been not doing work someone else has done. On our team, a lot of people have already been working on Landsat Linker and the Google Earth Engine products. So there's a lot of information you can get instead of spending hours trying to write a code. There's probably already code written out there if you just ask the right person. So asking questions and being able to get answers, even if they're not the ones you're expecting, is extremely helpful in research.
All right. And although some of our projects are still like in the works, we are able to come up with a few things. We got a training manual for LiDAR top-up bathymetry, which is something that Javeltex, the company we're working with, doesn't have. So we're able to come up with that. We have some of the blocks of LiDAR data. They're complete and they're ready to go, be turned into digital elevation models and be used for whoever needs them for planning. Landsat Linker we've done, and we're now ready to actually measure the coastal erosion with the COSAT program. And then for vertex detection and landslide detection, those are in progress, but we'll hopefully have something in the near future.
So in conclusion, this summer was pretty successful, especially when it comes to LiDAR data. We went from not knowing even how to explain it to being able to have a final rough draft of a instruction manual. I think some of the difficult things were working with outside organizations. So we were working with Javeltech, and there was a lot of just time in between questions being answered, and also trying to figure out who to talk to for our skill level, because it's a small group of people, so most of them already know what they're doing, and we're walking into this not knowing anything about cleaning LiDAR data. So it took a while to figure out who we really needed to talk to get the steps and get the resources that we need. One of the most enjoyable parts that we were able to do is we got to do some field research. So we were able to fly the drone along the permafrost test area and help out at the Nanana test site, also setting the drone flight path, which was really cool. Basically, we played a part in much larger projects that are just really starting to take off. So it'll be really exciting to see where these projects will go in the future. And also just want to do a special thank you to Aaron and Noelle, who were really welcoming with all of our questions and gave some great feedback and a lot of help throughout the summer. Any questions?
Two questions. So first, does your system take cleared trees as if someone's like going to build a warehouse as a landslide, and what do you do to mitigate that? And then second, I'm curious what you use for your LiDAR processing.
Yes, it can. So if someone clears land and like doesn't do anything with it immediately, like there are classifications for, like, say if it goes from vegetation to building, but if it just stays like a unused plot for whatever reason, yeah, it would catch that. So that's something I'm trying to work on. And what we might end up doing is using like a machine learning algorithm to pick out those, pick those out.
And then for your second question, could you repeat that? Yeah, sorry.
I was curious what you used for your LiDAR processing to get it to point cloud and then something compatible with Google Earth Engine.
Yeah, so we're getting it in point cloud form, but we're also getting copies of the RGB imagery, and it's going through a program called CFM. A lot of people can use it through GIS, but that's just the program that Javeltech decided to use.
I had a question about training the model on maybe Alaska vegetation versus other locations. Have you run into any issues with maybe different vegetation and different color variables to pick up with?
Yeah, that has been a very big issue because especially just from vertical imagery, it can be really difficult to see what's ice, what's snow, what's sand, and what's just sediment in the water. So that's something that a lot of it is just visually looking at it and trying to make the best decision. But yeah, that's something we're working on.
So you mentioned the RGB imagery, which just gives you 3 bands of natural color, but you also mentioned that you're using something with Sentinel, which is got a multispectral sensor on it. This is a can of worms question, but in that classification dance, are you looking at only the RGB imagery in that classification, or are you looking at potentially blending those 2 different types of data sets to like actually address like sort of those that question?
So right now we're just looking at the 3-band RGB imagery, but hopefully we'll be able to expand that, especially for some of the things that are a lot harder to tell. But right now we're just looking at really obvious problems. So like if there's birds or something where you don't really need to have more specific bands or try to be able to differentiate what that is, but hopefully we'll be able to look at that in the future.
Yeah, I'll just recommend that when you get a chance to play with that, differentiating between clouds and ice and sand, very hard in RGB, but when you pop into the other parts of the spectrum, all of a sudden those things just explode out. So exploring how to optimize those classification algorithms with those other bands would be that'd be a very valuable contribution. If that.
Okay, it's good to know.
Yeah, I had a question about related to the photo you had of like Haynes and Skagway, and I think you may have answered this partially with Dane's question, but so like that data from Sentinel 1 and 2 was you were using the RGB images to figure out those where those landslides were, or was that LiDAR data? And then like I was just curious like how you got that data.
So it went from the RGB, and then the LiDAR is something that's going to have to happen later in the future. So the RGB
Oh, I
data is, so we're using the RGB, so we're using the RGB data to figure out places we want to fly the LiDAR.
And so those like red, you had like red blotches where it detected landslides. That was able to be detected just from the RGB images?
Yes, kind of. It's from the classification system that uses the RGB imagery.
Okay.
So there's a step in between there, but yes.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, cool.
So I have a question, one that I kind of asked, I asked Melody, but you know, the work that you've done kind of both out in the field and in the office, do you feel like this maybe has shaped the direction you both want to go? And obviously, I know Noelle's listening, but yeah, I guess I want to know kind of how this may inform your future, in this field.
Yeah, so I just finished my first year and I'm majoring in computer science. So I didn't really have any idea of what I'd be going into for this internship, but it's definitely given me a lot of information about data science and kind of directions that I could go in. I'm not sure exactly what I want to do with that, but it's definitely given me a lot of really good experience. So yeah.
And maybe. I don't know. I'm still like pretty set on like doing policy stuff. So we'll see.